The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. As Jesus drew near Jerusalem, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, "If this day you only knew what makes for peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. For the days are coming upon you when your enemies will raise a palisade against you. They will encircle you and hem you in on all sides. They will smash you to the ground and your children within you, and they will not leave one stone upon another within you, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation." The Gospel of the Lord. I had to put on my thinking cap when I read these readings yesterday, and I, of course, read them before and done homilies on it before, but it sort of really challenged me this time. And as I reflected on it, there's a relationship between faith and peace. In the first reading, the Maccabees have incredible faith, and they're willing to give up temporal peace for eternal peace so that they can have eternal peace, and they gave up this temporal peace with the Greeks who were ruling them at the time. And then in our gospel, it's just the opposite. The Jews in the temple, the priests and the scribes, temporal peace, peace with the Romans is worth everything. And their God became the temple and their rituals, and they kind of forsake the real God, and they didn't notice his time of visitation. They didn't recognize Jesus as really God when he came, because their faith had been corrupted, if you will. So there's this link between faith and peace. And so I'm going to have to open that up a little bit so it helps me understand a little better. So looking at that first reading, Alexander the Great, the king warrior for the Greek Empire, he defeated the Persians, and so he was now the emperor of the empire. And the empire is all those countries around the Mediterranean Sea. And he ruled for about 12 years. When he died, he had 4 generals that he divided his kingdom up, and they each got a piece of that this Greek kingdom or Hellenistic kingdom. And about 150, and so each of those generals, their kids, their heirs, ended up being successive kings for those various kingdoms. And so the one that was in charge of the area of Israel and countries north and south of that to Egypt, about 150 years later, is the guy who was named Antiochus Epiphanes. He was the king, okay? And this is maybe 200 years before Jesus. And he decides, this would be a lot easier to rule all these people if we had the same God and the same customs and the same language. So everybody needs to speak Greek, everybody needs to worship their Greek gods, and everybody needs to follow the Greek customs, which included eating pork. And yesterday's first reading was about the woman who refused to eat pork, and her 7 sons. And so they killed her 7 sons in front of her, and then eventually martyred her as well, because her faith was so strong she refused to worship the Greek gods. And then in today's reading, because of what's going on with the Greeks trying to control the faith of everybody, one of the priests in Jerusalem leaves, and he leaves Jerusalem, he goes to Modin, so a little city maybe 15, 20 miles west of Jerusalem, so they can practice their religion and not be harassed by the Greeks. Well, after Antiochus Epiphanes passed this law, one of the commissioners goes to Modin, and it's our first reading that you heard today, and they're trying to convince Matthias, the priest, and he has brothers and he has 5 sons, to go ahead and worship the Greek god. And so he goes to the altar that's set up in Modin for worship to God, the true God, and then offers sacrifice on that. He wants them to offer sacrifice on that to the Greek gods. And Matthias gives this nice talk that you heard in the first reading, saying, I ain't doing it. And then one of the Jews goes up to offer a sacrifice on the altar anyway, and then he's filled with zeal and righteousness, and he goes and he slays the Jew that has the false sacrifice to the idols, and then he slays the king's commissioner who's there. Then he rounds up his brothers, and he takes his 5 sons, and they say, we're not going to put up with this with the Greeks. So this Greeks like the empire. So, they form this little ragtag army. They still take care of widows and orphans, and their faith is very strong. But they gave up temporal peace because it was too hard. I'm not going to give up my faith, my covenant with God to do that. And then they would take on the Greek armies and be outnumbered like 20-1 and win because God was with them. And they didn't take credit for it. They gave credit to God for those victories. And so there was that relationship between faith and peace. They were willing to give up temporal peace to have eternal peace with God, and they still took care of the widows and the orphans. And then we look at our gospel. Jesus is on his last trip to Jerusalem before crucifixion. This trip is going to end in his crucifixion. And he's coming from east of Jerusalem, and he's looking in Jerusalem, and he's weeping. He's sad because the priests, the Pharisees, they're worshiping the building. They're worshiping the temple. They're worshiping their rituals, their sacrifices and stuff like that, which is most important to them. And they're missing God himself. They, as it says in the reading here, they missed the visitation of God. Jesus was there. God was actually visiting. The God they've been waiting for 1,000 years to come, the Messiah, to save them. They didn't recognize him because their faith had been corrupted. They had faith in the wrong things. They weren't taking care of widows and orphans. And what was most important to them was peace with the Romans at all cost. That's like being friends with the Tasmanian devil. As soon as you turn your back, that guy's going to chew you up. Okay, but that was their thing. They wanted peace with the Romans at all cost. And so, again, now look at it with faith and peace. They were willing to compromise their faith in order to have temporal peace with the Romans and give up eternal peace with God. And so again, I had to put on my thinking cap. Hopefully I didn't bore you too much with this, but how does all this apply to us? It's like, we need to have strong faith, and our faith should speak to us and let us always go for eternal peace. And our faith should give us the courage that when we need to stand up against something that's not right, like abortion rights or whatever, then we'll have the courage to do that because the faith will guide us to do that.